Okay, so good evening, everybody. Good morning in the West Coast, good afternoon in the East Coast, evening in Israel. We are starting our session today. For those of you who doesn't know me, my name is Ophir Gutelzon, and I'm the co-founder and the leader for Unacceptable for Saving Israeli Democracy. Just to give the context, today we mark 775 days since the war, since October 7, and we still have three hostages being held in Gaza, and we hope to see them very soon. And keep reminding them until the last hostages is arrived back home. Um, we are also during starting today, almost like probably a year to go until mostly a year to go until election in Israel. And that means that our focus will be from now on to start and figure out how do we help from here to win how the pro-democracy bloc is going to win this election. Also important to mention that we are going to discuss the media today and the violence that Guy will soon will talk about more, but the rise of violence on the West Bank by Jewish terrorists and in the streets in Israel are all connected. And we're standing very strong today with the journalists in Israel who are being attacked by there is nothing better to say by a mob. Um, so I'm going to add Guy now, and I'm going to introduce him, and we are going to start our discussion. Guy,
Hi, Ophir. Hi, everyone.
so our conversation today is titled Israel 2026 Election and Netanyahu's Media Takeover. And our real question in because we are considered to be democracy, can we actually be a democracy if can Israelis still get real news? And obviously that's not just the case for Israel. So tonight we will address this existential question that facing Israeli democracy, and we will be guided by one of the foremost experts on this political economy of information, our speaker, Professor Guy Rolnik, who is a professor in strategic management at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business and founding editor-in-chief of the DeMarker, the Israeli Influential Business and Public Policy. And he's leading the voice against media concentration and has spent decades exposing how political leaders, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, use control over news outlets to shape public opinion. So, Guy, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
We are going to have this discussion a little bit different than usually. Guy will will basically run through everything that we need to know just to give us at the same baseline, and then we will open for questions that I hope you can put into the chat. Send them to me as a co-host, and I'll pick them up and chat with Guy, and we will deep dive as immediately. Guy, the stage is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to share my presentation. All right. Can everyone see and hear well? All right. Okay. So thank you, Ophir, for this initiative, and thank you for joining us. Some of the work that you'll see today is based on my activity and my research at three institute, University of Chicago Booth School of Business, the Stigler Center at the university, and the Brandeis Institute in Israel, and also my work as a journalist for the past 35 years in the Marker and the Haaretz. So we want to talk about the role of media and digital platforms in the backsliding of democracy. Backsliding of democracy is a global phenomena. I later show some data. In Israel last year, it was the first time that the leading institute that measures democracy, the VDEM Institute, downgraded Israel. It's no longer considered a liberal democracy, and it probably be downgraded again next year. So there is much talk about democratic backsliding everywhere, but in the last 20 or 30 years, the nature and the main tool of the people, the leaders that want to consolidate power, is different than the one that is the past. The major tool, the main tool of consolidating power is the news media. It's no longer the tanks in the streets or taking over the Congress or the parliament. It happened through media, traditional media, and recently, as we'll talk later, with social media. Only after you are able to control what people think, only after you build a machine of propaganda, you're able to gradually take over the democratic institutions. So let's start with some information. Who controls media in Israel? So most people are not aware that actually there are three kind of players that controlling much of the media in Israel. We have news outlets that are fully aligned with the government or serving as a mouthpiece of the government, like the well-known channel 14. Then we have news outlets that are owned by oligarchs or by conglomerates, usually conglomerates that have monopolistic position in some industries. And those companies, those conglomerate often require favorable regulation, and therefore they need close government access and ties. And the third kind of news outlets in Israel are the ones that are involved in some kind of corruption scandals, some of them directly with the current administration, with Netanyahu. As you know, he's indicted for his connections with some of the biggest news outlets in the country. How is Netanyahu consolidating his media control? The first one is gradually making sure that news outlets are owned by people who support him or needs his regulation. But that was not enough for this government. They understand that actually the most important thing is who controls the media, what kind of media you have in a country. And since the formation of the last government 3 years ago, there has been a lot of initiatives to undermine democracy, but much of the energy and one can argue the success, when you look at the laws and regulation put in place, has to do with trying to take over the media or curtail the media's independence, and they work in all directions. They are trying to reform the regulation of ownership of the news media, making sure that tycoons and oligarchs that are close to the politician can get a stronger foothold in the newsrooms. They are trying to limit the independence of the public broadcaster Kan. So these are all laws that are in action, moving in the Israeli Knesset. And of course, for Channel 14, which is the main mouthpiece of the government and one of the most popular news channel in Israel, they are carving out much of the regulation and giving them all kinds of exemptions. Why does it feel like why do many Israelis don't see what's happening? Because autocrats have learned for a very long time, this is not Netanyahu, is that if you keep a few critical voices in the mainstream media, you always create an illusion of balance. But those voices rarely drive the national agenda. They mostly react and comment and analyze, while Netanyahu and his allies are setting the priorities. So we still have a sense that as if we have still independent news media. It's important to remember that studies on media and its influence in the last 7 years have taught us that media doesn't tell us what to think, okay? The propaganda model of the hypodermic needle that you just can brainwash people really doesn't work. The way media influences everyone, even people that think that they are immune from it, is that media tells us what to think about, setting the agenda, how to think about the issues, and how to associate it with other things. This is why when you are able to control media and cooperate with media, it doesn't look like outright propaganda. Who is the most powerful news outlet in the country? Okay, most people don't know that, but it's Channel 12. It has anywhere between 30, 40, or 50%, depends on the time of share in primetime news programming every evening in Israel. As far as I know, and you can, if you find a country that has a higher share of one news outlet that has a higher share, please update me in the chat. As far as I know, Israel is the only country among the developing world that there is one channel with such a huge market share. And one can ask, can we call ourselves a democracy if we let one news channel consolidate so much power? The interesting question is who owns it? Okay. I would say that 95 or 99% of the Israelis wouldn't be able to answer who controls the main source of information, the channel that controls the agenda, the framing of the news and the priming of the news. The answer is that it's held by, believe it or not, by Coca-Cola. Yes, Coca-Cola in Israel, it's one of the most powerful conglomerate in Israel. A huge market share, a monopoly itself. It's the butler. It's not the company in the US. It's the representative of Coca-Cola, but it's fully owned by an Israeli oligarch. So, and then he's also a big shareholder in the biggest mortgage bank. Now, the important things about this ownership is that both Coca-Cola and the bank are very highly regulated businesses. Businesses, basically the bottom line, is dependent by the regulation or lack of regulation in those industries. And if you ever visited Israel and you wondered why Coke is so expensive in Israel, sometimes 50% or 100% at any other country, has to do with the kind of regulation that this company gets in Israel. And the question is again, okay, can we have a sustainable, thriving democracy when news outlets are owned by very, very large monopolies that need close ties with the government to protect their businesses? Of course, it doesn't stop with ownership and regulation lately, and this is from this morning. Lately, there's been a lot of incitement against journalists. Journalists in Israel are threatened. Journalists in Israel are self-censoring themselves all the time. It was the case for many, many years, but in the last 3 years, it's become much worse. This is just this morning. This is Reshet 13, the third or the fourth news channel in the country. Graffiti was sprayed tonight with saying blood of the traitor is permissible. Journalists. We see more and more calls for violence against journalism and violence against journalism, especially the journalists, but not only the journalists that cover the Netanyahu criminal trial, because our climate creates and of course this climate creates a very chilling effect that reporters are fearful. And now, actually, we are getting, if you think that was pretty bad, now we are getting to the worst part. And here we need to go into much more detail because this picture is more nuanced and complicated. Netanyahu was able to get much influence and control of the traditional Israeli news outlets. But one of the reasons that he has also weakened them in a significant way, in a way that basically they cannot hold him to account today, is that Netanyahu is one of the most savviest politicians in the world in understanding before many other leaders the technological shock of digital platforms and social media. And he has built an organic and a non-organic a machine on social media that has really changed the landscape of information and in Israel. Just to give you some data, what it means before we'll delve into how the system works, conspiracies now in Israel are very prevalent everywhere. And one of the most dangerous and alarming conspiracy is that anywhere between 20 to 30%, sometimes even more, of Israelis believe that the IDF, Tzahal, okay, colluded with the Hamas before and during October 7th. We never had these kind of conspiracies before we had unregulated social media in Israel. And of course, those conspiracies are mostly on social media, but you can also see that people who watch Channel 14 are more prone to this kind of conspiracy. Now, the important thing when you talk about social media, we have to remember this is definitely a global phenomena. We see this everywhere, like you saw it in the short clip from the film. This is democracy all over the world. All the leading institutions that measure democracy show the same trend. You can see that 30 years ago, most of the countries around the world were democracies. This is not the case anymore. We are moving into a more autocratic or proto-autocratic world. We are more polarized than ever. We are more angry than ever. We hate each other. In the case of Israel and the Jews, we feel that more and more communities hate us. Globally, we don't trust the government or the media. We feel that everyone is lying to us. The media, the traditional media, is struggling because of social media, and we feel that the world is burning, be it wars or terror or climate change. And these are all existential challenges, okay? And the question is what's behind all this? Now, there are a lot of reasons. Historians and political scientists will debate why is democracy, liberal democracy, declining. Today, I think we should highlight probably the most important force behind the democratic backsliding, and this is social media and digital platform. They are changing in a dramatic way our society. Those machines are rewiring the fabric of our society. And today in 2025, there are hundreds of academic papers showing how our society is changing, and most of the time not in a good direction. First, we have to understand that social media is owned by the biggest companies in the world. This is a chart from a year ago or 2 years ago, when the total market cap of social media companies was, the companies that control them was around $10 billion. Today, it's almost 18 billion, a trillion, of course, dollars. Those are the biggest companies that we had in the history of corporations. They've taken over all the big companies, banks, and oil companies. The companies that you used to think is the biggest companies in the history of corporation look like gnomes or dwarf today compared to the social media companies. Of course, they reach everyone. They reach billions of people all over the world. Most people spend anywhere between 2 to 5 to 8 hours on their smartphone, and people spend and the younger generation, of course, spends this kind of time on social media. If you are under 40, you probably not exposed a lot to traditional media. Your diet comes from social media, and they are wrecking democracy. What we have to understand is that the way that social media works is not through the advertising. Advertising, we remember it from the 2016 election in the US, you can use the advertising to manipulate. But much of the power of social media comes from the organic feed, okay? Not from the part from the ads, but what you really see in the feed. It's all designed to get us to see more ads, but the intention is just to addict us to the feed itself. So what's special about the newsfeed, unlike traditional media? Everyone sees a different reality. It's based on surveillance and targeting, using targeting based on the collecting infinite amount of information about every user. The feed, the ranking is based on engagement, and the goal is just to grab our attention and to feed us with information that will keep us addicted to the machine. And what we learned is that enragement usually and fear and polarization leads to engagement. Now, social media wasn't always the same. 20 years ago, when they started, they had a chronological feed following your friends. In 2009 and later in the 5 years after 2009, the people at the helms of social media companies like Mark Zuckerberg understood that actually if you rank your feed according to information you collect about the people, you're able to increase the time that you spend on the platforms. Documents that were leaked from Facebook 6 years ago said that the leadership at Facebook actually know exactly that all social media, and specifically Facebook and Instagram, what they are doing is that they exploit weaknesses in the human brain's attraction to divisiveness. This is the design of those platforms. Yeah, so as Ophir mentioned in the introduction, social media did not only change the diet, our news and information diet, when we are on our smartphone, it also dramatically changed how the traditional news media works today. If you see more and more junk and clickbait on traditional media, on some outlets, not all of them, as you know, some outlets have stronger ethical and journalistic standards. It has to do with them trying to compete and to survive in this media landscape. So what happens is that once the algorithm changes society, politics had to adapt, and politician not only has to change the rhetorics, how they talk, how they communicate, what's the language that they use, but they also have to change their policies. They adjust their policies to the world of social media. So this is how the algorithm works. It collects information about billions of people, and using this information, it knows what to feed those people to get them more addicted to the app and to the platforms. And of course, it's not prioritizing, of course, quality information. It prioritizes most of the time junk, malinformation, misinformation, and this information because they are more engaging and go more viral. And most of the scientists and academics and even politicians and decision makers around the world agree that misinformation is the biggest risk to our societies today. Lately, it has become so dangerous that some people think that in the short term, misinformation, disinformation is even more dangerous than climate change. If you were born in and lived most of your life in a world that had institutions of knowledge that were developed in the last 200 years, you know that your diet of information comes from credible sources, and you know that the Holocaust did happen, and you trust science, and you know that the elections were not stolen, and so on. But people who have moved, have shifted just to consume information from those social media, or they have a hybrid diet, many of them don't believe those things anymore. The question is, aren't social media supposed to catch this content? And the answer is no. They have a special law. It's called the Section 230 in the U.S. Communication Act of 1996, basically that says that social media is not responsible for the content they create, even if it creates huge damage, not only to users, but to society. So the platforms have no legal obligations and no economic incentives to invest in content moderation. So this is the business model, and it's pretty bad all over the world. Unfortunately, for the Jews, it's much worse.
Jewish, and there's a set of people who deny that the Holocaust happened.
Yes,
right? I find that deeply offensive. But I don't believe that our platform should take that down.
Mark Zuckerberg identifies as a powerful, centibillionaire, or whatever the term is for someone that wealthy, ahead of identifying as a Jew. I don't think he's willing to put the good of his people, or, by the way, the survival of his people, ahead of quarterly profits and earnings. And so as a result, he lets things slide that he shouldn't.
Of course. And this is, of course, the case with all other social media. There used to be a time when YouTube, for instance, was moderating a lot of anti-Semitic content and hate and so on. Recently, some of you probably watched the saga of Tucker Carlson interviewing the neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes. This is now available for everyone to see on YouTube. YouTube doesn't take it down. Last time I checked, it was there on YouTube. You can see them sitting down talking for 2 hours about the conspiracies that about organized Jewry controlling society. And whatever happens online has negative externalities everywhere, but it trickles to real life. Misinformation is everywhere. This is the people, the leaders that gather every year in Davos, in the World Economic Forum, saying this is the number what threats to our society. That's not at all. As we know, the people who, it's not only people like Netanyahu that know how to use those things. Now, social media is used by all the big powers around the world in influencing other countries. Okay, those are called coordinated inauthentic behavior networks of fake accounts, trolls, avatars, sock puppets, and so on, that are financed and operated by countries like China and Russia and Iran in order to influence or sow hate and divisiveness in countries all over the world. They also add to the mix with the kind of information that we get on our feed. It can be used domestically. It can be used between countries. In Israel, we see it a lot with Netanyahu using such. Netanyahu is, we can see a lot of inauthentic activity happening that is supporting Netanyahu on social media in Israel. It's spreading all over the world. It was used massively probably by China, Iran, and Russia after October 7th. It led to the reason we saw the connection between using social media and anti-Semitism all over the world. We saw it in TikTok, we saw it on X, we saw it in Instagram. People who are exposed to it are more prone to anti-Semitism. People who think actually, people who are one of the reasons, probably one, not the only reason, is that the college age kids some of them think that actually the massacre did not happen. It's a conspiracy. It has to do with the information diet that they have. Most of them get much of their information from Instagram and from TikTok and sources like that. How does it work? It works through networks of bots, avatars, and sock puppet. Sometimes they work from troll farms around the world. Bots are very effective in driving the toxicity all over the world. And from the virtual world, it ends up many times on the streets, like we've seen in the last 2 years. This is how the algorithm looked until 10 years ago, and this is how they are. On the right side, you can see how they are used today, how they are programmed today, and there is a clear, not causation, but correlation between the decline of democracy and our public sphere and our public discourse And you can exactly see how it changes and deteriorated once the algorithm were changed to be based on surveillance-based targeting. Now, one of the best ways to understand everything that we just said in the last 10 minutes is to let the leader of this ideology that we need a world that will be led by the algorithm. We need to see a world led by those algorithms. And this is, of course, the richest man in the world.
On sheer numbers, there are on the order of 2 billion Muslims in the world. And I think, much smaller number of Jewish people. 20 million, something. So if you just look at content production, just on sheer numbers basis, this is going to be overwhelmingly anti-Semitic.
This is one of the most amazing video clips or interviews that we've seen in the last decade, and I've been a journalist for 35 years. Here is the richest man on the face of planet, I don't know, 200, 300, 400 billion dollars, that controls X, the third or the fourth largest communication platform in the world. As you see, he has the plate of the hostages. He wants to see how he supports Israel and the hostages. This was around 2 years ago. But when he's asked about the spread of anti-Semitism on X, because he eliminated all the moderation and basically said, free speech, absolute free speech, I don't care what they post. When Andrew Ross Sorkin from the New York Times asks him, what are we going to do about it? He basically said, not going to do about it anything. 2 billion Jews, only 2 billion Muslims, 20 million Jews. These are the numbers. This is what you're going to see. You're going to live from now on in a world full of anti-Semitism, hate, lies, conspiracy. This is our brave new world this is our future according to the richest man alive. What would you do? Okay, so the answer is that every time that we had a technological shock in the last, 700 years since the invention of the printing press, there was first, after the shock, technological shock ensued usually chaos, division, and wars. And we put in place institutions and laws that regulated, that filtered, that curated information. This is why we were so successful for many, many hundreds of years, especially 200 years, because we understood that information is very dangerous and you have to put laws on the book. Everything in our life is governed by laws, otherwise we will not be a civilization. The only realm of our life, which is the most powerful realm in our life in the last 10 years, is not governed by any laws. We need to have laws on the book, otherwise we won't have a democracy. We need to eliminate Section 230 that gives them total exemption from any liability for the harms they create, the content that they spread. We need to ban targeting algorithms that are based on surveillance. We need to have real identities. We need to age and we need to age gate. And it's not too late. We need to do it now. In Israel specifically, because the situation is so dire, we must lead this effort. We cannot wait for Europe or to United States to have regulations on the book because we are in a very, very fragile democratic situation and security situation. And we need to put, again, laws on the book to govern who is able to control the news media, how concentrated can be the news media in Israel. If we do not have laws in the book that are enforced, that make sure that media serves the public and not the government and not the oligarchs, and if we don't have laws in the book that governs what social media can do or not do, we will not have a democracy in Israel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guy. We can stop sharing the screen. I'll add myself to the spotlight. Okay, that was a very deep dive into the net and the information. And there is a lot of questions about coming up about what can we do from here. And we will dive probably to this soon. The question that I have about that, because you know so good the system in Israel. I mean, like in reality, social media in Israel, who is controlling the media on social media? Is it also the Channel 12 and others, or it's becoming even more wild west because those who are being built on Channel 12 are then using their own networks to spread even more misinformation?
No, social media in Israel is controlled by 5 companies that you all know. It's controlled by Meta, it's controlled by Google, YouTube, it's controlled by X, by TikTok, and in Israel, particularly, it's also Telegram is very big. Those companies, through their algorithm, determine basically what kind of content spreads, what kind of content is elevated, and what kind of content is suppressed. Now, they mostly don't care if it's right or left or anything. They just want it to go viral. And whatever goes viral turns out that is the things that tear up societies, the fabric on societies, and create divisions and lies and misinformation. It just brings in more dollars. In a way, you can say that Israel has lost its sovereignty. Why? Because if the entire information landscape is controlled by 5 companies, most of them from Silicon Valley, from California, then we don't have sovereignty. You know, every other company that operates in Israel, the food company, a bank, or whatever, is governed by the local laws. The only companies that are much, much more powerful than the local companies in terms of their political influence, they are not under the jurisdiction of Israeli law.
There is a question about social media, and you mentioned specifically X and Elon Musk and the fight for anti-Semitism. And I would want to maybe clarify that. I mean, that was an example. I mean, it doesn't say that Elon Musk needs to fight anti-Semitism on its own, but anti-Semitism is just an example of like hate overall in the platform. I mean, it can
Of
be
course.
hate to any other group. So I don't think that we have any expectation to get a preference treatment.
Yeah, and if you mentioned Elon Musk in the last visit to the U.S. on the sidelines of the UN meetings, UN address, Prime Minister Netanyahu talked with a group of, Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't give real interviews to real journalists in Israel, but he meets a lot with what they are called influencers, people who are just, their business model is just to get clicks and do not need to abide by any ethical or any professional norms. So he had a meeting with a group of American influencers, and during that meeting, he mentioned, like in passing, that Elon Musk is sort of a friend, an ally of Israel, and now we have people that are close to Israel that are taking over TikTok. So we know that those machines are shredding our democracies, and to see Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that he looks at them as their allies, you clearly understand what's happening here. Okay. Netanyahu is not worried about the rise of anti-Semitism on those networks. He just thinks that they are very useful for him in order to stay in power.
So one of the other things that is coming up usually is how much external influence is on the Israeli channels. So we know who owns Channel 14. And then we know that Mr. Sheldon Adelson was buying a newspaper back in 2000, and I don't know what is 15, 16, and many of Prime Minister Netanyahu trials are around the media. So the main question is like, is there anything that the liberal camp can do in order to support Israeli media, or do you think it's mostly like a game that is owned by Israelis and needs to be handled by Israelis?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of people that calling for liberals to buy news outlets. Unfortunately, in this current environment, okay, with social media and the digital environment, this was maybe the case 10 or 20 years ago. And today, if you have liberal people, okay, people with money, people with a lot of money, people with some money, and people who care about Israel and care about democracy, if they want to save Israel, the way to do it is by supporting initiatives to put laws on the book that will govern social media in Israel and the media outlets in Israel. Unfortunately, lies, populism, misinformation, radical ideas, supremacy theories, those things will always be more viral on the news media. The liberal part, the liberal democratic part, all has to adhere to journalistic norms, most of them anyway. And therefore, when you look at the numbers, you look at initiatives on social media of liberal Democrat liberals, and you compare how viral they are, and you compare it with the other side, the people that are not binded in any shape and form by the truth or by civic responsibility will always do much better. So the answer, if you really want to change the trajectory of Israel, we must use our democratic institution. And this is exactly what we did in history. Okay? After World War II, we understood how Hitler used the radio, and we understand that we have to regulate radio and television. This was always the case throughout history, that we saved our democracies using democratic institutions, using laws and regulation that govern the way that the media works. When it comes to social media, it's more important than ever.
And I would just add on top of that is that obviously the media that is being created in Israel sometimes ignore what's happening. We know that it ignored what happened in Gaza, and sometimes now we are starting to hear more about the West Bank violence, and the same media that is being created in Israel is also flowing into our younger generation here in America. And that's why it's super important. Another reason to get this information in the right way. Guy, the other question that is coming up is really around the ties that we hear about Qatar influencing the media here and in Israel, here in the US and in Israel through Al Jazeera and others. I mean, based on what you are saying and what I understood from like, it seems like it's not as important as social media. Like when they are buying media, or buying or transferring, or maybe they are controlling social media better. What are your thoughts about Qatar?
I'm not an expert on the Qataris. From what I understand is that Qataris were very, very savvy. They were trailblazers. They were before many other people in many other countries and many other organizations in understanding digital, in understanding social media and the digital landscape 15 years ago, okay? They were very, very active on social media during the Arab Spring and later. Today, the Qataris are not as powerful as other players, okay? In each country around the world, you have local politicians and local business people that are playing this game, and you have the empires, like you have the Chinese and the Russians, the Iranians. Those have huge machine of propaganda. The Qataris are not anymore a leading force in terms of specifically social media. Of course, Al Jazeera is still important in the Arab world. Qataris have a lot of other ways to influence discourse. Qataris is in academia, Qataris is in think tanks, Qataris are in everywhere, but they are not as dominant as they used to be.
Also in the Prime Minister main office, they are also there.
Yes, of course. This is the system that they use everywhere they get into. You see the Qataris in DC, you see the Qataris in Jerusalem. They infiltrated a lot of important people, but this is like directly through think tanks, through lobbying, through hiring people, ex-generals, and so on.
There is two more questions I want to take, and we're almost on time. I mean, one of them will be if you can give a short brief about what Minister Kari is basically doing and how does it replicate itself in other democracies. The idea of taking apart the public news and who controls who on the media. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so people who follow what's happening around the world probably saw that 2 weeks ago, the biggest newspaper in Hungary was sold. It was one of the few news outlets that were still more independent. And Viktor Orban, that is facing a potential loss in the next election, understand that the most important thing you can do is consolidate power on the media. Now, the reason, by the way, I didn't mention it before, the reason is that people underestimate how important is the news media is because media is influential in shaping how people look. And media doesn't talk a lot about it because a lot of news outlets don't want to discuss the ownership of a news media, okay? There is a clear conflict of interest. So as the elections in Israel are getting closer, I hope we're going to have election in the next 10 months or so. We see that the government is trying to push much harder the reforms. What are those reforms? Is just letting oligarchs, okay, buy easily and take control easily of news outlets and letting, for instance, letting current oligarchs buy more, okay? Today, there are some cross-ownership regulation. They want to do away with them.
And it's coming back to the question of regulation, as you said. I mean, like there is this discussion about is more regulation mean more censorship or more regulation means more real news?
Of course not. The biggest censors, the number one threat, okay, to free speech is the social media. Because we have a situation today is that there are 5 censors, okay, people who decide what will be elevated and will be oppressed. If we want to have free speech is not something that happens alone, okay? Okay, it's not when you have, if we don't have laws, we are in a jungle, okay? We need the police, as we need laws, as we need courts, we need laws that govern media. And if we don't, free speech is something that you really have to work hard all the time to make sure that the government and powerful business interests don't take over. Now, the way to make sure that government and business interests or big tech companies don't take over and squash free speech is by having laws in the book. So when we say laws and regulation, they are always aimed at preventing censorship by powerful technology entities or by politicians.
Okay, I think we covered a lot, and we are on time. I will just end by thanking you, Guy, for basically spending the time here. I want to thank everyone who signed up and joined us. We have, as the guy said, 10 months from now, we are going to have an election. It's a big question about what kind of election will it be, how free there will be, how free of to actually both by press and by violence that we see on the streets. So we need all of you to join the effort. Either you can fly to vote, go ahead and do that, or if you don't, we are going to start and create some opportunities for everyone from here to support the pro-democracy bloc in Israel. So I will end here. Thank you, Guy, again. Thank you, everyone, for joined, and the recording will be available on YouTube soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.